In the early years of World War II, there was one fighter plane that stood out above all others. It was a design so spectacular in appearance, it instantly attracted the attention of all who had the pleasure of seeing it flash through the skies. It had a distinct beauty that was unmatched, and a sound so smooth and quiet, one might easily miss its approach toward them, and it would be long gone. But the after sound left the viewer quite stunned, with a paralyzing astonishment and/or disbelief. It was so fast you had to see it coming on its approach toward you, or you would miss seeing it zoom upward and out of sight to more than 20,000 feet in a matter of minutes. Seeing it was indeed an awesome experience. Tony LeVere. What was this multi-personality aircraft that was so awe-inspiring? It was, of course, the Lockheed P-38 Lightning. Steve Bodie has stated, "As viewed by almost any prospective pilot in the setting of the 1940 to 45 era, the P-38 was awesome. Although it tended to intimidate some who saw it as a fearsome machine that was beyond the capability of even the most advanced flying school pilots, it was remarkably easy to operate and docile to fly. The destructive firepower and blazing speed characteristics exhibited by the aircraft could hardly have been comprehended just 5 years before Pearl Harbor became the target of the Japanese." Just how awesome was this aircraft? Let's talk to some of the pilots who flew it during the war. Meet some of the pilots of the 475th, members of Satan's Angels, who established an unbelievable record of 551 victories in the Southwest Pacific. Their statements will indicate their love for this aircraft and why they wanted to fly it from day one of their training.
I think it was the top of all aircraft at that time, and no doubt about it. I'm a two-engine man, and thank God that I was flying two engines. The 38 had the capability of flying long missions. This is how General Kenny convinced General Arnold to establish a new group and provide it with long-range capability. And of course, the long-range capability was the P-38.
Love that airplane. Greatest airplane I've ever flown. It certainly was the best coordinated airplane. When I mean coordinated, counter-rotating props, there was no torque to contend with. And it flew fantastically well on one engine. This was always a big plus. I can remember the early days, you could almost hang that on its nose and let it drop off and take hands off and come out by itself. Beautiful airplane to fly.
Oh gosh, that was heaven getting into that airplane. And it saved a lot of guys' lives by golly, being able to come back with that dude if you needed to have another engine running if you got one shot out or quit on you. I just loved that airplane. It was like a Cadillac, just like a Cadillac. And it sounded so good on the ground when you taxi with it. And you could, it sounded like a blown muffler car, you know, vroom, vroom. It's a great sound. Wonderful airplane.
As these combat pilots just explained, the P-38 was an awesome aircraft to fly. For many of them, having two engines meant the difference between life and death. Lieutenant Joe Forster, Dale Burgess, and Pete Madison explained missions where having that second engine meant they made it back to friendly lines and were able to fly in the future. Lieutenant Joe Forster thought this was going to be an easy mission. They were to fly cover for B-24s that were going to bomb an oil refinery. But as they were joining the bombers, they began to hear about a dogfight taking place with another group of fighters and the Japanese. By the time they got to the site, the Japanese planes were dispersed throughout the sky. But they entered the fray, and Joe shot down one Zeke 52 with a 90-degree deflection shot. While he was going after a second Japanese plane, the Japanese pilot got a shot off that took out Joe's left engine. Now the fun was going to start. But let's let Joe tell his story.
The mission required that the 475th Fighter Group would cover the B-24s over the target. But first of all, we had to fly up to the Halmaheras because we couldn't get there from Biak, so we had to stage through Halmaheras. The distance to the target was 836 miles, and it was the longest trip that we had ever attempted. The outfit ahead of us that was escorting the 24s, they got into a fight because the Japs had sent out some interceptors. And so we could hear this, but we hadn't quite caught the B-24s. We hadn't quite approached them, but it all happened about the same time anyway. And all of a sudden, in front of me, from 9 o'clock, directly across my bow, so to speak, nose, was this P-38. And he was going downhill. You could see he was descending, picking up speed. And about 300 yards behind him was a Zeke 52 right on his butt. But he wasn't quite close enough to fire. And it was a 90-degree deflection shot. I didn't aim, I just dumped the nose and said, "Plup!" And the damn thing just came unglued. Cowling came off, it caught on fire. And about a half a second burst. So as I was turning to my left to make pass, I cleared myself. And at the same time, I saw a little joker come out of the thin overcast up here and go straight down on Colonel Smith. Straight down. And I thought to myself real quick, why go get that one? We got one right here, you know. He didn't even touch Colonel Smith. And he went down below him, so I started turning back in to the right. Always turn into the guy that you're going to chase. And he just looped right back up like this and came around, and I was just pulling all I could. And somebody says, "Joe, he's firing at you." And with that, boom, I was hit in my left engine. So I just went for the ground, the sea, from about 18,000 feet, I guess, at that time, something like that. And you know, everything worked just perfect. I went through the procedure of feathering up the engine, shutting the engine down, and everything just worked absolutely perfect. So here I was on the waves, and I couldn't climb on single engine. It just, of course, I was a little excited, you know. And I couldn't climb. So when you get yourself in a situation like that, you start expending your ammunition, you see. You shoot your ammunition up. So I go, brup, and wait, let them cool, the barrels cool a little bit, brup. And it seemed like that went on for ages, brup. And what I was trying to do, of course, is save the barrels on those machine guns. Finally, I got so upset, I said, "The hell with those damn gun barrels," and immediately the airplane started to climb. So I got on course, and I was kind of hesitant about going to the shortest distance through the Celebes as opposed to staying on course so I could possibly get home. Finally, I hit landfall on the Celebes. Now, the Celebes was all enemy territory, and the Japs still had a lot of bases there. Not aircraft bases, but ships of all types. And they were supply depots there. And I knew if I flew over one of those at that low altitude, they'd shoot my butt off. So I started tacking like you'd do a sailboat to get around those cities, you know, and then I'd hit the coast over here on that, and then I'd come back this way. I got to the end of the Celebes, and that was the big decision time. Can I make it across to the Halmaheras. So I made the decision I'm going to try it. So at the end of an hour, we had a radar station at the Halmaheras there. I started calling for steer, radar steer, and I couldn't raise that radar station. Couldn't raise it at all. And I was getting panicky because I couldn't see land. And all of a sudden, this voice came over the radio that I recognized. It was Lieutenant Rataski. And he came over the radio and says, "Joe, what do you need? I'll transmit or repeat it to the radar station." And I told him I was out approximately 270 degrees, I thought, from the radar station. And he says, "I'll relay that." He came back rather and he says, "For identification purposes, you must turn 90 degrees to the right and fly that 1 minute." Well, that's the hardest turn I've ever made in my life because I knew I was losing ground. I thought I was losing ground, you see. So I turned to the right 90 degrees and boom, before the 1 minute was up, he says, "Joe, they got you." So they brought me right in over the strip. You couldn't have asked for a better landing. So I went out about a mile, downwind leg, base leg, and on the approach, got my airspeed down, put the gear down, worked perfect. Came in about a quarter of a mile out and put down half flaps, worked perfect. And came over the end of the strip and put the rest of the flaps down and came down perfect. Everything worked perfect. That's the reason I love a P-38. So much worked perfect. I opened the cockpit, and of course nobody met. We didn't have crew chiefs. And I stood up, and I was going to go down and let the ladder down so I could get down. And I don't know. The next thing I knew, I was on the ground. I'd passed out or whatever, and went off head first on the ground. And the next thing I know, I was laying on my back there, and I hear all these voices coming. "Hey, Joe, I see you made it, you know." And I kind of rolled over and looked up, and guess who was there? Tommy McGuire. Tommy had been listening to me on the radio, and he came over, and after I kissed the ground, he came over and shook my hand, and it made me feel so good for Tommy to come over. I have the map today, and it's got a lot of sweat on it, I'll tell you, and dirt, and me figuring on it. And the way I flew back, tacking like I said, like a sailboat coming across, I covered over 900 miles on the single engine, which I guess was, I don't know, somebody said you broke the record or something. I don't know what it did.
Lieutenant Dale Burgess had the experience of not only losing one engine, but both of them on a landing. Yet through his skill and perhaps a little luck, he was able to get one started and make the landing. Here's his story.
It was that lady, we came back and we buzzed the strip to have them come down and pick us up, you know, to take us back to camp. As I went across the strip, there was a big bang, and they said they heard it on the ground, but this one engine quit right now. So I feathered that one and went on out, and the other one quit. And I switched a bunch of tanks and finally got that one going. I was ready to put it down wheels up out in the field, but that one caught, so I flew it back around and landed opposite direction right over the top of a fellow going the other way. But I got it down about 1,000 feet. Saved the airplane there.
For pilot Harold Pete Madison, there was one mission that would remain forever in his memories. He was flying an anti-shipping escort mission in June 1944 to Manokwari when he dove to strafe a Japanese foxterre, a large transport vessel. The enthusiastic Madison got what is known as target fixation. Because of this, he was too low and struck the mast of the ship, leaving pieces of his P-38 scattered on the enemy ship below. He found himself 50 feet off the water, flying upside down on one engine with his own blood spattered on the inside of the canopy. Somehow, his youthful spirit managed to right the P-38 and, escorted by Lieutenant Hal Gray, made it back to base. Here's Pete's description of the incident.
Major McGuire's leading, and there's altogether about 8 of us, of which I was somewhere back in the middle of the pack. And we circle over the field, and just a little bit of ack him, so we stay away from that. We go out over the harbor, and Major McGuire sees some shipping down in the Manaquary Harbor. So he said, let's go get it. Don't drop your belly tanks. Save what fuel you have, because after this, we'll continue on to another target and see if we can't find what we're looking for, which is aerial combat. So we start strafing these Japanese freighters down in the harbor. And we're still conscious of fuel economy. We didn't change our RPM back to what we should have, which is like 2,300 or more. That'll give you a better lift for pullout. Don't forget, I'm a rather new pilot, you know, in the whole scheme of things. And so I'm diving on this ship, following the leaders up ahead of me, and I'm getting hits right on the bridge of the ship, and it's just a very thrilling thing. As you can see the shells impacting on that, and I'm hitting there, and I start to pull up at the last minute. And I didn't have enough recovery with the RPM there at 1,600. I mushed in and hit the mast of the ship. And that mast was, you know, about this big. I hit this with the lower part of the right engine propellers. And the first thing I did is it turned me upside down, flying away from the ship. And the propeller starts to break off. And it breaks off. I right the plane. Still have the belly tanks on, remember. And I right the plane, and the propeller continues to break off, and part of it goes through the canopy, you know, the plexiglass canopy, and smashes that, and I duck because I see it coming through because it's going like this, you know. And I duck, and it goes through, and a piece of the plexiglass hit my head here and put a big gash in my head. And by this time, a reflex action, which all pilots are taught, I leveled out. And I'm flying along away from the harbor, away from the ship, and as far away from all those Japanese people as I can, but I'm sinking. I've got one engine, I've got this big hole in the right engine where the propeller was, and there's a great big hole about that big, and I turned off all the power and electrical and all that, so there was no fear of that, but it didn't matter much because most of the instruments were not working and they were all beat up in this impact. But I'm sinking. I'm sinking down, and my radio's not even working well. So I can see myself going into the ocean, maybe a few miles away from Manaquary, and that was not very inviting. And so I'm flying along, and I got a message through that the guys, I'm sinking. But remember this, I'm in a state of trauma, shock right now. This blood's coming down, air is blowing in through the canopy and all of that, and the right rear vertical stabilizer was knocked off by the propeller as it went back. So I'm in big trouble. One of my very, very dear friends, who is now a Major General named Harold W. Gray, Hal Gray, he flew up alongside of me and caught my attention because I'm fighting to keep that plane flying, and I'm only doing about 160 miles an hour where normal would have been 220, 230, and he gets my attention. He drops his tanks. I go, oh. My tanks are still on there. They're dragging me into the water. So I dropped the tanks, and I started to be able to hold my altitude. Not dropping down, I'm holding. I can't climb much, but I'm holding. Okay, now here we are just outside of Manaquary. We've got about 350 miles back to base. I'm in trouble. I'm hurt. The plane is badly hurt, and I'm scared to death. So they led me back because they wouldn't let me go back as a wounded bird, because if the enemy saw me, I'd be sitting duck for them. So they led me back, and we headed back towards our base at Hollandia. And I'm drawing a lot of power on the good engine, and my fuel gauge on that engine is going down and down and down, and so I said, I'm not going to make it. And in between me and the base is many, many miles of water, and even worse than that is the jungle. Because if you go down in the jungle, there's no chance of rescue, because there's just no way to get you out. We didn't have helicopters and things of that nature. The big problem was between our location, which was along the coast of New Guinea And Hollandia was a large series of mountains. And they were about 5,000, 6,000, 7,000 feet, and I couldn't get up over a few hundred feet, because if I tried to climb, I poured too much power, she'd want to roll over, or if I didn't have enough, she'd stall out. So I continued to head back, and we knew that a small island off the coast of Hollandia that had been captured by our infantry just 2 days before, called Wakde, W-A-K-D-E, was now in American hands. And that was a low island. It was off the coast where I was headed for. And I decided that's where I'm going to go, and I'll put it down on this island. Next problem is, when I get there, what am I going to do? The radio and a lot of the power systems are not working. So I can't get my wheels down. I can't get my flaps down. And I'm going to have to belly this thing, because if I tried to put the wheels down and then they're hanging up, I'm going to crash, because there wasn't enough power to carry the wheels, the drag, and a big hole in the engine. So I decided to do a belly in. And so we finally got there after about 3 hours or so of this single engine trauma. And I circle the island once, and it's a small island about the size of Catalina. And I see the runway and I get lined up on it. And in the meantime, Hal Gray and Jim Mooring had already landed, because if I bust up the runway, they don't want to be stuck up in the air. So they land and get off to the side. And I come in and I start to lower the speed down and flare out and everything. And I wanted to do it far down at the end of the runway so that anybody coming behind me would have room to land. Well, finally, I touched down on the belly, and she skidded for yards and yards and hundreds of yards. I can't tell you how far, but the coral dust in the back is flying up and the sparks are flying. And I've got all the things turned off now that would cause a big problem. And I finally come to rest at the end of the runway. And everything stopped. The dust has started to settle. The dust that was in the cockpit is all settling down. I'm sitting there, and frankly, an extreme state of confusion. But we were taught one thing: when you land, the first thing you do when you land, you pull out the Form 5 down here, and you fill out that, and you say, mission so-and-so, and etc., what's wrong with the airplane? And I'm sitting there. All of this is in a matter of a few seconds, you know, I'm sitting there, maybe half a minute or a minute. And Hal Gray and Jim Mooring, who had already landed, they came running out, and I'm sitting there and said, get out of the plane, it's going to blow up. Catch fire and blow up. So I dropped the Form 5, I crawled out of the cockpit onto the wing and dropped down, and that's the end of the story.
Telling the pilot's story only gives the viewer one side of this great aircraft. The other side is the maintenance side of it. Was it hard to get parts and keep the planes in the air? Were ways found to work around the system? How did these special men keep the planes flying, and what did they think about the aircraft? The maintenance personnel and crew chiefs have their own stories about this aircraft. Let's spend a few minutes hearing about their trials and tribulations.
Well, of course, they were new aircraft, and to me, it was not a difficult aircraft to work on. Of course, as time rolled on in my later years in the service, I realized that my knowledge of aircraft was minimal. I didn't realize at the time that I was crewing an airplane that I knew so little. But to me, the P-38 was an easy aircraft to maintain. Of course, the big thing we had trouble with was spark plugs because of the high content of the lead in the fuel. And spark plugs seemed like they were constantly being fouled with lead deposits. But other than that, I can't recall any great problem with the P-38.
We makeshift and we learned how to repair hydraulic pumps. That was a no-no back stateside, you know, but fortunately we had some old automobile mechanics before that sort of got into the nuts and bolts and were able to pass that on to us, to fix and place seals and such things as hydraulic pumps and brake seals, expanded tubes on the brakes and things like that.
That's what we prided ourselves on, that we kept them flying, and we had to do a lot of juggling sometimes to get the necessary things, but that's what we were there for.
You would rob other planes, rob some of them if any crashed or had some problem with them. You would take parts off of that. Most of the time we had the parts we needed. Once in a while we didn't. My worst was up at Mindanao. my plane came in, my regular pilot wasn't flying it, and the old boy got hit in the rear elevator with, I think, a 20mm shell. He left a hole about 4 inches diameter, and the back of it tore up. Well, we were short of planes up there. We were just advanced force. That's when the great turkey shoot was going on. They didn't know how soon I could get it fixed. Line chief and I said, "Can I have some help?" That was around mid-afternoon, 4 o'clock. I got about 3 or 4 guys to help me, and my God, the screws on that thing didn't have any new elevators, but we went to one that cracked up, nose wheel went in. We took that elevator off, took ours off, put mine on. About 5 o'clock in the morning, the next morning we finished it. That's about the hardest work it is.
The ground personnel certainly did their job and kept the planes flying. Although they might have been the real unsung heroes of the unit, they were certainly appreciated by the pilots. Here are just a few comments describing what the pilots thought about their ground personnel.
Our ground crews were phenomenal. It was, if we were having a big mission and needed all the airplanes, you'd see the ground crew out there with their Jeep lights on the airplane, servicing the airplane. There might be some minor thing wrong, so that the plane would be ready in the morning. And there was never any question about the job they were doing. I think every fighter pilot in our group had tremendous respect for all our ground personnel.
Unbelievable what they did to keep those airplanes running, keep them and they did a good job. When they said it was ready to fly, it was ready to fly.
To think how those guys worked at night in those terrible conditions, the mosquitoes and everything else, to get those planes ready for us morning after morning after morning, and go down to the flight line in the dark, and all your crew chief is there. He's got the plane all warmed up for you all. You get up on the wing and all, he hands you up the chute, because our chutes probably weighed 40 or 50 pounds with all the stuff we had in them and all. And they get up there and help you get in and all this kind of stuff. And it worked, the plane worked, you trust him. It never even occurred to you didn't trust him.
I thought they were tremendous. They were the most important person we had as the battle that was taking care of our aircraft. Without them, we would have been dead in the water. And I would say that we had a tremendous crew.
They cared for us. They cared for us, and they didn't turn out anything but perfect work. They were excellent. And we wouldn't be here today if it wasn't for them, really. You never worried about your airplane. It was in your hands. They did their work. Now you got to do yours.
One can see the pride and love in the eyes of these men who flew and worked on the P-38. There is no doubt in their minds that this was the greatest aircraft of World War II. In fact, the commander of the 475th, Colonel Charles McDonald, summed it up in this quote: "It was a marvelous aircraft. It was the best aircraft I flew in the war by far. I like the P-38's rate of climb, its speed, the way it handled, and its concentrated firepower directly out the nose. The P-38 was one of the great aircraft of World War II."